Across the Park podcast is proud to be sponsored by Globe Gas and Heating. For the best kitchen and bathroom renovations, boiler servicing and repair, and central and underfloor heating in the Northwest, head over to globecentralheating.com and quote Across the Park for a free quote. Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Across the Park podcast with myself, Ian Mills. We're going to be looking back at the frustrating defeat on the first game of the season. We're going to be talking a little bit about the remaining weeks of the transfer window, what we need. Is the manager getting it right? Is the manager getting it wrong this transfer window, in a window where we can't really get it wrong? I'm delighted to be joined by someone who I've tried to get on the podcast, very, very kindly giving me his time to come on the podcast. It's the Liverpool Echo, Everton correspondent and journalist, Joe Thomas. Joe, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Cheers. Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Looking forward to it. We're going to look back at the weekend, and then we're going to talk a bit more in depth about Everton, and then we can go and get a beer after that. It's okay with you. First question I want to ask is obviously the game on Saturday. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. Everybody is right in hindsight. You look back and go, should have done that differently, and you're right automatically. Yep. But looking back in hindsight, was the first mistake, was it the team for you? Was the lineup right on Saturday?
I think it was.
Okay.
I think it was. I don't think that... I mean, if we've got to take Sean Dyche at face value when he talks about the injuries and the fitness and the rehabilitation progress of Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Arnaud Danjuma, and a couple of others as well. Like, we have to have asked him about that, asked him about him after the game. And he was very clear in his approach to Dominic Calvert-Lewin, despite obviously a week earlier having 2 lots of 45 minutes, and despite him not having suffered a setback. I asked the club, they were very clear, no setback. Obviously, they didn't think he was right to start. So when you bear in mind the resources that he had at his disposal, I actually think that the starting lineup was fine. Is that going to be one of the weakest starting lineups Everton have this season? I think it probably will be as players come back from injury and as the squad strengthens. Obviously, you've seen Jack Harrison become the 4th summer signing. But when you look at the resources he had at his disposal and you look at what they did, I actually think he got the setup right. I don't think you can attribute any of the blame for that defeat on Sean Dyche, because if anything, I think you almost flip the script and go the opposite way. And you look at that side, and that side will probably want to be one of the weakest sides that was put out there on the Premier League opening weekend of the season. Yeah. And yet it's a side that really and truthfully should have had that game won by half time. If you look at whether you look at the performance because you were there, or whether you look at the stats that underlay the performance, the game should have been done and dusted. So I'm looking at actually thinking, I'm not saying that Sean Dyche gets everything right or has got everything right since he became Everton manager, but I'm looking at that starting 11 and I'm thinking for him to have set that side up in a way that probably should have been 2 or 3-0 up against a mid-table Premier League side last season, that's actually quite impressive.
I think the big thing for me really is, and you're right in what you're saying, Everton should have been 2 or 3-0 up at half time. The chances that we had, and we didn't control the first half, but we were very clever, and when we got the ball, what we did, we tried to hit Fulham. The problem for me is the striker, for me, Neil Maupay, and I know there's been a thing this week with the club have came out and condemned abuse, which I'll do as well. I'm not here to abuse anybody, but that won't stop me giving my opinion. I don't think he's good enough to play for Everton. And the fact that he played on Saturday and he's sparing chances. The Dominic Calvert-Lewin thing for me, Joe, I get it. Let's protect him and let's see if we can get another 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10, 15 more games out of him by being clever with them. It's the Danjuma one for me. I think the Danjuma one, I'd have really started him. I'd have also, and this sounds silly, and again, in hindsight, you sound right, I'd have give Tom Cannon a go. I'd have just said, look, we know you're probably going to Preston, but Neil Maupay's not going to be here. I'm going to give you a go, kids, before you go to Preston. Lead the line. So for me, Joe, it is, I think he got it wrong with the striker. Yeah,
I mean, I can understand what you're saying, but obviously Tom Cannon is someone that hasn't kicked the ball in pre-season for quite a long time. In the friendlies, he's been injured himself. Arnaud Danjuma was coming back from injury himself as well, and we know that he also, in the same way that Neil Maupay probably isn't an appropriate spearhead for an attack in the way that this Everton side plays, Arnaud Danjuma isn't that either. He is someone that's either better coming on off the left wing, or he's someone that's probably best off being a support striker for someone like Dominic Calvert-Lewin. So when you look at the options that he had available to him, I'm not sure what else he probably could have done. Bearing in mind, we know that he clearly has a very high threshold for what he considers to be match fit.
Yes, yes.
So if you bear that in mind, you work on the basis that surely if Danjuma could have started, you'd think he would have started. Calvert-Lewin could have played, you think he would have done. Obviously, it's in Dyche's best interest to get the best 11 out there. So you're working on the basis that he's, probably whatever he's seen in the data on the training pitches, he would have those players there if he could. Because he couldn't, he had Neil Maupay there. And I think that isn't necessarily an issue for the starting lineup on Saturday. That is probably more a wider discussion about obviously recruitment, how Everton are in the situation where so many transfer windows on from the loss of Richarlison, and there were issues even there before Richarlison went that they haven't addressed that issue where there isn't a backup striker to Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Obviously Tom Cannon, we'd all want to see him do really well, and I think had he been fit throughout pre-season and had another 180 minutes in his tank against the likes of Stoke or Sporting or even behind closed doors against someone like Monza, I think there would be a very good argument for him to necessarily have started in that position as opposed to Neil Maupay. But I'm not really sure what Dyche could have done if we take him at face value with what he's saying about where everybody is in relation to their fitness. And I think that, again, obviously the chances that side created, it wasn't that it didn't... It's not just that it created those chances, it also stopped Fulham from having them. Obviously, I know you can't really say that Everton dominated that first half. Obviously, Fulham had most of the possession. But I think it was very much a template for what we're probably going to see a lot of this season. And probably what Dyche almost wants to see, that idea of being happy to concede possession so long as it doesn't hurt Everton.
Yes.
And then be effective when you do get hold of the ball. And like we saw, I think 40 minutes in, it was 20% possession and an XG. Whether or not you believe in how much weight you attribute to those things, an XG of over 2, which is actually pretty impressive.
Absolutely.
But obviously, not taking those chances is an issue. Of course it is. And I think that's a personnel issue. I agree with you on that. Some of the answers lie within the squad. Obviously, the idea of Dominic Calvert-Lewin coming back fitness, Tom Cannon coming back to fitness, and then hopefully layered upon that with recruitment. They've got to get another striker in. We know that. The club seem to know that, but obviously they haven't been able to get there yet in this transfer window or previous ones. But I can kind of see why that lineup was how it was, and I don't necessarily have any problems with it. I can understand why people might have been deflated when the team sheet came out at 2:00.
Yeah, of course.
I can completely understand that. But I think when you saw what that side was able to produce that first 45 minutes, for the most part, I think it was probably as good as Sean Dyche could have hoped for. Obviously, the massive caveat, they didn't get the goal that they should have done.
There's lots of mitigation in the starting lineup, and I get what you say. I just don't want to go into Villa. If we've got the same available 16, 17, 18, I personally wouldn't play the same team. I would play someone else up front. But we'll get to Villa at the end. I want to talk a little bit just about the frustration at full time. So I think it's important to say Everton got clapped off. The fans clapped Everton off at the end of the game because they've seen that Everton pushed. And I think for me, it was one of those days where you'd put 3 or 4 past someone else on a different day. But the frustration was there. And the frustration for me is I looked at Fulham on paper. I said, don't get beat. Just don't get beat. Yeah. And already we see that's happened. Is it the same for you? You feeling a bit frustrated by Saturday?
I think everyone would feel frustrated. Nobody wants to start a season with a win. No one wants to start a home form with a win.
Yeah.
And Fulham represented an opportunity because it was it's a Fulham side that, although they did said earlier they finished mid-table last season, I'm not sure they'll quite be at that strength this season. Obviously they got work to do in the transfer window, and obviously it was a starting lineup against Fulham which didn't include Pereira, Mitrovic, their 2 most dangerous players last season. So there was a necessity for Everton to kind of get the job done in that first hour before the reinforcements came on, because you looked at that Fulham bench, you looked at the Everton bench, and there's absolutely no comparison, is there?
Yeah.
And again, that is one of the wider issues that needs to be addressed and people need to be vigilant on, and work still needs to be done, even with the addition of Jack Harrison. More still needs to come in. I think frustration is right, but I also think that Everton were very, very close to being coming away from that first game of the season with a comfortable win. Onana 2 assists, 2 of the more maligned players in the Everton squad, Michael Keane and Neil Maupay, already on the score sheet.
Yeah.
It was very close. Now, the margins for Everton over the last 2 seasons have been so tight that you can't concede home games to Fulham like that. You can't just give up those points. They may well have a consequence come the end of the season. But it was still better than I saw for a lot of last season, even under Dyche. And I think there were still positives to take from it. Obviously, it's a stepping stone. There's a hint there that what Dyche is doing with that squad, as thin as it is, what he's doing there at Finch Farm, he is working towards a wider goal and he's making a progress in that. He got a side there that, again, don't want to keep repeating myself, but will probably be one of the weakest 11s Everton put out this season, and it was more than competitive for most of that match.
Actually.
So I take positives from that, but yes, there is frustration as well. Everton can't afford to lose too many home games to sides that are going to be mid-table, bottom end of the table, and they have to work very quickly and very astutely in the next few weeks to make sure that what happened against Fulham doesn't also happen against Wolves, and then doesn't happen away to Sheffield United, and then doesn't happen at home to Bournemouth, because there are only so many chances that Everton are going to get to put points on the board given their squad makeup.
And that's where it got scary for me at the end of last season, because there were winnable games, or there were games at home where you shouldn't have lost, and Everton lost them games. And I think this is one of them. I did go on my instant match reaction on Saturday, and I did say I'm not really worried by that. I do think Everton will be okay this season. I think the style of football we've seen on Saturday with a low percentage of possession, however trying to hit teams on counter and set pieces, that's probably the makeup of how we're going to win games this season. What I do want to ask you about, we've talked a little bit about the formation, the style and personnel. The centre-back partnership he went with on Saturday was Keane and Tarkowski. I think a lot of Everton fans were thinking it may have been Godfrey or Branthwaite.
Yep.
Do you think he'll now stick with Keane and Tarkowski as the pair?
Yeah, I do, and I expected him to go Keane and Tarkowski before the season, and I think I would have made the same choice as well, to be honest, just because there are more ways in which things could have gone wrong, I think, if Branthwaite had started in the season alongside Tarkowski. I think that Branthwaite's someone who's very exciting, and I think he will be a long-term solution. I think he may well end up becoming one of the centre-backs that plays most of the games this season. But I think that when you look at that squad, and given the loss of Yerry Mina, given the loss of Connor Cody, given the expected departure of Mason Holgate, given the fact that I'm still not particularly convinced by Ben Godfrey in a 2, I don't think that Sean Dyche is either. I think that he probably had to start Michael Keane, because the problem is if you don't start Michael Keane, you create another problem in an area where there's already an issue with the amount of depth there. If Michael Keane comes out of that starting lineup straight away, then what does that say to him? All of a sudden, it's a massive issue with morale for a player in the camp. And if you're Michael Keane, and given the state where he is in his career, and you're losing that spot to Jared Branthwaite, well, you're probably spending the last 2-3 weeks of this month looking for a transfer elsewhere. Everton can't afford to do that. Similarly with Branthwaite, for all the potential that he's got, he's clearly made huge strides during his loan, because of his loan spell at PSV. You can remember the last time we saw him at Goodison Park was in that game against Brentford when he got sent off. Yeah. Talk all we want about the fact it probably should have been a penalty to Everton in the build-up to that move. He kind of got out-fought and out-muscled by Ivan Toney there. It was a red card once you accepted that passage of play got to that point. So, bear in mind there's a chance that he might have been coming up against someone like Mitrovic. Imagine the pressure that he would have been under if he'd have started, and imagine what might have happened if, say, he'd have made a mistake or nerves got the better of him or something like that. Again, you're in a situation where you're creating potentially more problems than you might necessarily want to at this stage in the season with a squad that already has issues. So I think the sensible thing, again, given the personnel he has at his disposal, was probably to make that position Michael Keane's to lose. And if he loses it and Jared Branthwaite comes in and takes his opportunity, as we all suspect he may well do, then no one can turn around then and go, you haven't given me a chance, you haven't done this. For squad harmony, which I think matters in a squad when you've got so few players, I think it was probably the right call. And I don't think it was a call that necessarily hurt Everton at the weekend either. And really, again, Michael Keane should have had a goal. I know he's not there for that part of things, but I agree. It was a bit of a unfortunate one that goal got chalked off.
It's quite admirable, really, from the manager, because you talk about creating problems there. My personal opinion is he probably does create problems in playing Keane and playing more. But you see in the last season where I've got a friend who says Keane gives Dyche bad PR. Because some fans are sort of done with Michael Keane, or they don't want to see Michael Keane play. But it is quite admirable that's his belief that that's the best team, and he just shut that out. So I think it's quite admirable that he does that. However, my personal opinion is I probably wouldn't have played those two. I'd have been more happy as a fan to see two kids, to have seen a Branthwaite and to have seen a Cannon or a Dobbin, and I think a lot of fans would have been. But look, away from that, if we play Michael Keane for the rest of the season, I still think we'll be okay. I don't think he's going to be the reason that if we are in trouble. I don't think Michael Keane will be the reason. I think eventually you'd have to look at how do we get better, how do we expand, and do we then move Michael Keane on? But there's more pressing areas for me, which brings us on to transfers, incomings and outgoings. I think a lot of fans sometimes forget that Everton do need to get rid of some players as well. Our books are not good, and you can't just load more wages onto these books. You've got to be clever. Andre Gomez, if he doesn't leave, do you see a future for him this season, a role?
Not really. Okay. No, not really. I think, obviously he may well become a squad player in the same way that Tom Davies. He might fill the Tom Davies gap of last season, which was, we know that Dyche doesn't even like to make that many substitutes, and Saturday suggested that might still be the case, even though the games are going to get even longer this season, and even though he's got a lot of issues with injuries. So, I mean, obviously, Tom Davies left because he wasn't getting many minutes. I don't really see Andre Gomez forcing his way into it. It's clear that Dyche has a favoured. Certainly, he likes Segura. He likes Idrissa Gueye. Amadou Onana is starting in the centre midfield. I think that Dyche likes James Garner a lot as well, and obviously I think it's Garner's. I'd be really interested to see if Dyche had a full strength squad at his disposal. I'm not sure who would have started the season out of Garner and Onana as the third centre midfielder. I genuinely don't know that, because I think that, especially in the business end of last season, it seemed to be that Dyche favoured Garner in that position, albeit Onana had a few injuries and sickness issues and things like that. So Garner's probably been moved away from his favoured position because of his versatility, rather than because Dyche has made a concrete assessment as to what his first three is. But there's those three. Plus Garner, there's four. Gomez isn't getting ahead of any of those four. Yeah. And then even then, there's a question as to, once Everton get through this transfer window, depending on who they sign, and also get the players fully fit back. Obviously, I think Alex Iwobi is another option. Dyche hasn't tended to use him in this, but that role in which he played under Frank Lampard, that left centre midfield of a three, I do think that it's the most effective that we have seen Iwobi in an Everton shirt. And I think that, as reluctant as Dyche might be to play him there because of what he brings to other positions, I think that he would probably be there ahead of Andre Gomez as well. So I don't think he gets above fifth choice centre midfielder. He may even be sixth choice centre midfielder. I think the ambition would be to try and move him on if they can. Obviously, if they can't, I mean, I know Lille are interested again. Paulo Fonseca wants him back, but you've got to try and work out an agreement there. I
think it's the wages as well. He's on that very big pay packet.
Yeah, he is. He's one of a few. I think, there are so many ways in which next summer is the big summer for Everton. Next summer is you've got new stadium on the horizon. You've got a lot of the big wages coming off the books. Yeah, that's probably the opportunity. And you've also got the one of the big negative years for the financial fair play, the profit and sustainability going off the books the other way. Yeah. So next summer feels like the real opportunity for someone like Kevin Farwell to get hold of this squad and deal with some of the issues that he's inherited properly. Everton have got to get there first, haven't they? That's the thing, and that's where Everton should be geared up to, and probably is geared up to at the moment, just making sure they survive this season. And if they can do that, the next summer, we might see proper transition and change. Yeah,
it feels like we're saying that every season.
It does.
It feels like next summer's going to be the summer. Next summer's going to be the summer. And we'll probably close the show on this. Excuse me, but it goes back to years of mismanagement for me, where we're still in the fog. You think you get out the fog, and the fog, you're still there. You can't see the end in sight. So I hope you're right that next summer will be. I don't want to have you on the podcast next summer and we're saying the following summer, because I'm quite sick of saying it and talking about it.
I understand that, definitely.
Another player who looks to be on his way out is Damari Gray.
Yeah.
Whether that happens or not, I think the fact that he's not in a matchday squad, he's not featuring in pre-season. I think the manager said that he hasn't been training due to an injury. I'm quite sceptical of that. I think it's more the case that they just want him out. Are you quite surprised by that saga, that he's maybe not in matchday squads? He does seem to be being shunned out.
I'm not surprised that he's likely to leave Everton this summer. Yeah. I think we probably saw the back end of last season in the limited way in which Sean Dyche used him, even when he didn't have many options at his disposal. It was clear that Damari Gray wasn't in Dyche's first choice plans. Yeah. I think that was obvious, and I think we probably understand that Gray is at a stage in his career where he wants to be playing first team football and will believe that he has the ability to do that, and he probably does in the Premier League. He's probably just not a Dyche player, so absolutely not surprised to see what's going to be an anticipated move away from him. A little bit surprised with where we are with the use of him at this present moment in time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Clearly, he had a good Gold Cup with Jamaica. He was on the same kind of fitness pathway as likes of Branthwaite and James Garner, who were also away well into the summer on international duty and have been back for a long time with that squad. There wasn't any obvious issues I was aware of with Demarai Gray. And, we talk about how few options there are in that squad at the moment. If we take Dyche at face value with his injuries, and Demarai Gray, if you take him at face value as another injured player, but you can't help but think that there's a job that he could do within that squad at this present moment in time if there was a different plan for him. So
in these winnable games at this first portion of the season, if Demarai Gray is at Everton, I use him. It's that simple, and that's my opinion. The signing of Jack Harrison on loan with a possibly going to purchase at the end of the loan. What does Jack Harrison bring to this Everton team?
Well, he's another player for a start. Okay. He's another player. He's a player with Premier League experience, isn't he? And he's someone that you think would fit well within a Sean Dyche team. Obviously, very, very hard working. Tends to play in off the left wing, and probably in the same way that Dwight McNeil did at the back end of last season. He's another option in that respect.
Not
he's
bad
someone
numbers there, then, goals and assists.
107 Premier League appearances. Yeah. He's got 16 assists, 21 goals. So that's a goal involvement better than 1 in every 3 games, which is a significant step up on a lot of what Everton have got at the minute. And again, that Premier League experience is crucial. So I think he's a good signing. I think also I'm slightly concerned by the overload of left wingers. It seems to be that. If you look at probably the most high-profile signings so far for Everton this summer, in Jack Harrison and Arno Danjuma, they're both players that play in who are probably best in the one position, where Everton's best player in the second half of last season, Dwight McNeil was. So
also plays there,
Also plays there. So I'm intrigued to see how all these fit in.
Yeah.
I think with Danjuma, I think the ambition is that eventually he plays off Dominic Calvert-Lewin.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what happens there. But there's a definite need for squad depth. Everton have got 2 main priorities to address for me in the remaining stages transfer window. One is up front. They need somebody that kind of takes the pressure, can operate as competition and cover for Dominic Calvert-Lewin, who ease the burden on him and him being fit every game, and also take the pressure off someone like Youssef Chermiti coming in, having an immediate impact. Also someone that can kind of play the system in a more effective way than Neil Maupay can, because he's not set up for the way this Everton team is set up. This Everton team has a plan A, no real plan B or C. And within that plan A, and this was one of the things where I think Maupay has been a bit, let down is probably a bit too strong, but I don't really know how he was ever going to have an impact in this Everton squad, given his strengths aren't, facilitated by the players that Everton have got. And that's always seemed evident. So
with Maupay, I've always said Maupay has scored goals elsewhere. So just to call him, a bad player or whatever, I think is unfair. I just don't think it fits.
So it doesn't, And so finding that additional striker is key. And then the other thing is finding squad depth, because for all I praise what Dyche was able to wring out of that performance on Saturday, it was also entirely predictable that Everton would, matches are 2 or 3 phases now in a way that they weren't, say, 2 seasons ago. The fact that you can have 9 on the bench and make 5 substitutes, it means that those stronger squads are now making 3 substitutes before 65, 70 minute mark, and then they can have another 2 later on in the game, or they've got those other 2 as a backup if their initial change of plans doesn't work. So really, you're moving away from needing a squad of 11, 12, 13 to 15, 16, 17 players that can all do a job. Everton don't have that. And that's a problem. One of the things I tweeted after the game was, no matter how well this transfer window goes, you suspect that Everton are going to be in a situation where they need to, the games that they're going to win, they're going to need to win them in the first hour and then be competitive for the next 30, 40 minutes as opposition make all those substitutions, because Everton don't have that strength in depth. Someone like Jack Harrison does bring that, whether he's starting or whether he's coming off the bench. It is that Premier League know-how, that effectiveness, that does help. But we did see it time and time again last season. Wolves on Boxing Day, Forest away. they made 3 changes after 65, 70 minutes. It changed the game, took it away from it.
Absolutely.
On the flip side, you look at Leicester away, when it felt like 2-2, that massive game. It felt like the game was there to be won in the last 10 minutes, and Dyche didn't make a change. He only made 1 change in that whole game, and it was Coleman because he got stretched off.
Yeah.
Even Bournemouth, you look at Everton, faded in the final minutes against Bournemouth. Obviously, it was a huge game, and incredibly intense. But Bournemouth had a few chances late on. Dyche only made 1 substitute in that whole game, and I know that's part of it. I've asked him spoke to him about this. He doesn't like to change things that he thinks are working, and we know that fitness is a big positive of a Sean Dyche side. But you need to have options there. You need to be able to compete with a side that is going to change a third of its starting lineup with genuine quality around 70 minutes into a game. And we saw where Everton struggled with that. We saw the dangers of not being alive to that problem on Saturday when Fulham go and make 3 changes. Lo and behold, all 3 of those changes combined for the match-winning goal.
Yeah, and that's big for the fans as well. I think when the fans see an opposition club making those changes, for me, when I seen Pereira and Mitrovic come on Saturday, I'm thinking, oh God, that's a good change, and it even affects the fans. You mentioned there competition in the squad, and goals are probably what Everton needs to shut this transfer window out with. Do you think, and feel free to use all your in the nose, do you think Everton will be able to address some more issues in this transfer window? Will we be able to bring 1 or 2 more in?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think I think we'll see more outgoings. Obviously, I think Holgate will probably go. I think we'll see Damari Gray. I think there's an ambition. But not a necessity for this transfer window for whatever their initial outlay is to be covered by whatever comes in. Yeah. So we'll see that going. Obviously, we know with the likes of the Youssef Chamiti deal, heavy on the instalments front. So Everton's initial outlay from what they've done so far, obviously 2 loans, a free signing, and Chamiti, is still pretty minimal. I asked Dyche recently, and he said, they don't need to sell to buy anymore going on where they are. They've clearly got other issues that need to be addressed beyond those that have been dealt with so far. Obviously, going up front and you just think surely they've got to be alive to that. They say they're alive to that. Dyche saying the other day that that they're in the market, and that to a certain extent him and Falwell are advancing, trying to find a more experienced Premier League striker, someone that can fill a gap between Chamiti and Calvert-Lewin. I want to say surely there's no chance that they get through another transfer window where they haven't. But I'm also someone who was just sat there, my head in my hands at 11 o'clock, and on February the 1st thinking, I don't quite understand how this has happened. So we know it can happen. Yeah. It's Everton after all. Someone's going to conspire against someone, it's going to conspire against Everton. But you think, the big problem has been a big problem for so long, and it's been so obvious that surely this is the window where at least a more positive step to address it is made. Because if they don't, then if they go through another season where they're really, hinging everything on Dominic Calvert-Lewin being fit for the majority of games, then that is a dereliction of duty. Yeah, so
they've got to do something. I've started this podcast speaking to you, Joe, and I've said that I think Everton will be okay. Yeah, and even if we don't bring anyone in, I think we'll be okay. But the risk with that is it just takes 2 suspensions or 2 injuries, and you haven't got that competition in the squads. If Dominic Calvert-Lewin has a similar season to last season, where he plays not even half the games, if we lose an Abdoulaye Doucouré for a period of time, all of a sudden we're really weak. So I do think we have to do something. I think there's probably something in the Nonto at Leeds. I think there's something there. Now he's spat his dummy out and he's refused to play at games. I think that's the end for him there. Whether we can do a deal with Leeds or not, I don't know. I'd like to think we can bring him and a striker in. I think if Everton can do that, then I think we can have an okay season. An okay season for me is just being able to sleep in April and May.
Nonto's an interesting one. There's interest. The clubs have been talking for since early July. Possibly even earlier than that. Leeds and Everton do have a very good relationship, and as has probably been showcased by them being able to get the Jack Harrison deal, despite what's gone on with Willie Nonto over the weekend and him facing disciplinary action. With Nonto, it's an interesting one. I mean, the wages that he's on at Leeds, they, even with relegation, they're more than content. They think it's affordable. Yeah. So I don't think improving on them from an Everton perspective probably wouldn't be particularly difficult. Yeah. But the problem with that is Leeds don't want to sell. They've got him on contract for another 4 years. They don't think his wages are prohibitive. they do think he can make a difference for them in the Championship.
Yeah.
And they will want to make a decent chunk of money out of selling him if they end up feeling they need to do that. So that's probably going to be one where what matters on that is probably going to be the interaction between Gnonto and Leeds rather than anything that Everton can do. Because one thing that Everton probably can't do in this is they can't just go to Leeds now and put so much money down on the table that Leeds go, you know what, we've got a problem within the squad now. This addresses it and we save face because we made so much money out of it. Everton can't quite do that. Anything that they do, even for Gnonto, is going to have to be, installments and, small first time figure and grow from there, which is obviously far less appealing to someone like Leeds, whose priority is now getting back into the Premier League. So, and Gnonto could be crucial to him to doing that. But I mean, it'd be brilliant if Everton could pull it off, and obviously, a centre forward has to be the priority, and is, I think. So.
I think Gnonto could be a deadline day one. I think that will go to the wire because, like you said there, and rightly so, Leeds want to save a little bit of face with their fans and arguably keep some of their better players and try and have a go. If Leeds just get rid of all their best players, then their fans aren't happy. But I think there's something in that. I really hope you're busy on deadline day. I really hope you are busy on deadline day, my friends. I want to talk a little bit about you, if you don't mind. How did you start off at the Liverpool Echo?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a news reporter by trade.
Yeah,
that's it. I started off in the Southport Visitor, and I started back in the 2010. So I did about 12 years as a news reporter, covering all sorts from, councils to crime to the courts to one of my specialist subjects is Hillsborough and the prosecutions in relation to the tragedy.
All right.
I'm someone that I was part of the coverage team for the inquests, and then the criminal trials in relation to David Duckenfield and the others. I was there every single day for both of the Duckenfield trials and then for some of the trial that followed later and that as well. So that's how I kind of came onto the Echo, and that's where most of my career lies. So I'm a relatively new convert to sports journalism. I moved to become the Everton correspondent March, April of last year. So my first game was that game at Turf Moor, the defeat to Burnley.
It really got us worried, that one, didn't it?
So I'm still in a position where the only managers that I've seen manage Everton are the ones that were present on the first day that I was in the press room. Obviously Dyches and Lampard and have gone through there. The job came up. I'd spent a lot of time covering news, and I just saw the Everton job come up. For what an absolute privilege that would be to cover such an incredible club with such a fantastic fan base, to champion the club and defend the club where saw fit and where I think it deserves it, but then also to apply scrutiny where I think that was deserved as well.
I'm not just saying this because you're here. And the guys who've worked at the Echo predating you, I imagine they're all good lads and have all done good jobs. You seem to me, on the outside of it, to be one of the first or only journalists locally to call the club out. Now, my personal opinion, and long-time viewers and listeners of this podcast will know, that I don't think Everton ran very well, and I don't think they've been ran very well for years. I think that the situation we're in now, where the club is seemingly last season when they released the accounts and the script that went with the accounts, sort of said if we go down, we're in big trouble as a business. To get to that point, I think there's been mismanagement. The fan groups and the fans who feel the same as me and are more active, and they protest and they ask journalists to call a club out. And I understand it's not easy for a journalist just to call someone out. For one, it's probably not the right thing to do. For two, it's probably not an accurate level of what's really going on. You seem to have gone a little bit where you've said, look, I think there's problems at Everton and I'm going to write about it. Was that a difficult decision for you to make?
Yes and no. Obviously, if I do that, it has consequences for me on a personal and a professional level. Of course it does, and it puts relationships in jeopardy and everything on those lines. But ultimately, I think Everton's a wonderful club. It's a massive, historic, storied club. And I think it, as a result, and it's huge, not just in the footballing world, but it's huge for this city. And when you look at what Everton means, it isn't just on the pitch. You look at the new stadium project. It's one of the most important regeneration projects probably in the whole of Northern Europe at the minute. You look at what Everton in the community does. Brilliant. And, it saves lives and makes a difference to lives on every single day. So, when I see Everton, I see it's far more than just a football club. because of that, and because of its importance, and because of its heritage, I also think it deserves, full scrutiny as well. It does deserve to be, questioned and held to account when I think it's got things wrong, as well as championed and celebrated when I think it's got things right.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously, the approach I took with some of my coverage last season, I stand by everything that I wrote, and I think, there will be some people that say, why didn't you do it sooner? Why didn't you go further? Well, the reality is that, I'm a journalist and I'm accountable for what I'm writing, and I need an evidence base for what I've done. So I mean, a lot of it is going in there and seeing what happens, and seeing and making me notes, and logging this and logging it, and going when I think's right, and trying to be as fair as I possibly can. Everything I've done has been an attempt to try and be as fair as possible. And obviously, everybody is more than welcome to have their. They can be the judge of what I've done and whether they agree with it or whether or not, from the club to the supporters base. But just trying my best, basically, to be as accurate and as fair and as honest as I possibly can be. Won't always get it right. There have been times I've been very, very grateful for the support that I've received from supporters. There'll be times when I get it wrong as well, and I know that. But I just hope that everybody knows I'm trying my best and being as professional as possible as I can. So even when I go things wrong, it's coming from an attempt to be the right place, at least, anyway. So
no, I enjoy listening to you, and I enjoy reading your work as well. I think it's of a really high standard, and I'm really happy that you came in and spoke to us today. It was refreshing for me to see some of the articles that you've done last season. Now, I know you can't write Ken right out because Fulham beat us. It's not that, you can't do that, but I think you're one of the first journalists to have looked at it in depth, analysed it and put it down in paper. And some fans won't agree with that. Some fans will say to you, you're wrong, but other fans, and I just think it's quite refreshing to see a journalist, local journalist, who seems to want better from the club, not happy just to report on it. You want better. You want to report on Everton being successful, and you've got an opinion on it. How have the club been with you since that? Have you had any pushback from them? Because I'll say there's good people at that football club, Diamond lads, who are great lads who work there. Have you had any difficulty with the club since you've had those articles? Or?
Well, I mean, I think it's fair to say, if you look at the tact and the approach that I took, obviously that's not going to win me much love from the people that I'm criticising, or the institution that I'm criticising. You're not going to Bill's 80th, are you? Right 80th, you're not going to that. I think that's no. So it's always a difficult one, and I think that with something like Everton, it's you almost have to compartmentalize it. So there are things that are good about the club, and there are things that are bad, but people are trying to get them better and things like that. And last year was difficult. It was difficult. This year things there are elements of things that are still difficult. But I think the important thing is that, myself, like you, like so many other people, like people within the club, everything that we try to do, we want it because we want better Everton.
Absolutely.
So it's all coming from a good place. And that's where the intent lies at the end of the day. We're all better, from your podcast to the Liverpool Echo's coverage to the city as a whole, everything is better with the stronger Everton are. And that's where all our ambitions lie and all our intentions lie. Might have different ideas about how to get there and who might be the best people to take advantage of the opportunities that lie there for the club. But ultimately, we all want the best for Everton. We all want to be championing Everton and defending Everton as much as we possibly can. And hopefully we get there as soon. Hopefully we get there quickly.
I really hope we do. And you're right in what you're saying. Everybody, regardless of your opinion, everyone wants a good Everton, a better Everton. That's all we want. And you have different thoughts, and I think it's really, I think it's great that people can challenge each other. I think dialogue. I think for me, just to say yes to everything you say wouldn't work. I've got to challenge you and say, what about this method, this idea? I think that's where Everton's, the boardroom and the people who make decisions, I think that's where that's got to get to. Now, whether MSP do come in, I believe it's close. Where they bring their own men in, their own women in, their own decision makers in. We get change. I think the team on the pitch is evolving. I've not seen quite a turnover of players in 3 or 4 years that I have now. The team 3 or 4 years ago was completely different. So I think the club is going through change. I've put my neck on the line and I've said we'll be okay this season. I'm going to ask you if you'd kindly put your neck on the line. How are Everton going to do this season?
I think they'll be okay. Yeah, I think it'll be. I think there'll be times when it's a difficult watch. I think this is a season of transition. I also think it's a season of pragmatism. Dyches is so very good. He's realistic, and he will play the most effective way for Everton to get results. That might not always be pretty, but I do think that they'll be okay this season. I think there's positives to take from the performance. When you, as I say, when you go back and you think how weak that side perhaps looks on paper, and you look at how effective it was able to be for the vast portion of that game, it suggests that the underlying principles, what Dyches is doing there, he's raising the base level for everybody. It's not just when the best players come in.
Yeah,
I think the league is weaker. We perhaps made this error with likes of Bournemouth. I mean, even Scott Parker made this error with Bournemouth last season. He wrote them off too early. And I don't want to do the same to Luton and Sheffield United. But obviously Sheffield United have lost some of their best players in coming up. Luton, again, you think there's a significant gap that they've got a breach in quality between where they were from the Championship and survival in the Premier League. Yeah. So I think that Everton will benefit from that in a way that they didn't, because no one really dropped off last season until Southampton right at the very end. I think Everton are stronger for having Sean Dyche as well. I realise that he's not to everybody's tastes, and I think that he will make decisions that perhaps divide the fan base in terms of how he sets up and who he chooses and how he decides to play. But ultimately, I think that Everton are stronger because they start the season on a war footing. Last season, I think that there was a bit of naivety, and I think, and I will fully admit myself that I think there was a bit of optimism going into last season. I think that certainly up until the Minnesota United game, there was a belief that I had, and I think that people within the club and within the fan base probably had as well, that the season before, where they stayed up against Crystal Palace, couldn't help but think that was a side that was better than a relegation battle. It got into an incredibly negative spiral of momentum where, psychologically they were in a bad place, and that was complemented and exacerbated by a terrible injury list and some bad luck with some big decisions as well. I thought if you got to, you get to Crystal Palace, you survive, and if you give those players 6 weeks to refresh psychologically and physically, I thought it would come back naturally 4 or 5 points better. And then when you add the signings that they made on top of that, I thought things would be better than they were. They weren't. I was wrong in that respect. As other people may have been as well. I don't think there'll be any delusion or naivety or complacency about this Everton side this season. I think what Dyche will do is he'll set up a side that knows, first and foremost, it's in a relegation battle, and the first thing to do is to get enough points to get yourself out of a relegation battle and then aim for higher. That's what I think he'll do. And I think because of that, because there's an awareness that Everton are in a fight from the beginning, I think they have a head start, because I think there are a fair few clubs with it who were mid-table Premier League last season that are going to end up in a relegation battle that don't necessarily expect it right now and aren't gearing up for that. And as a result, Everton have a head start on them. They've just got to exploit it. And the problem is, obviously, we saw against Fulham, that was one missed opportunity to get 3 points on the board. Yeah. They have to make progress within these opening set of fixtures. You look at the fixtures between now and the October international break, couldn't really have hoped for much better. They've got to make their own luck. What they can't have a season where, for all I'm saying there about how I think Luton and Sheffield United and a couple of others might struggle, Everton have to save themselves, not rely on others to save them, which I think is a point it got to last season, really. Yeah.
Let's have a safe Everton before we have a better Everton. Let's have a safe Everton. Joe, it's been really kind of you to come on, give you time on a Monday afternoon. What's your plans this week? The Royal Blue podcast, is that back out this week? Royal Blue podcast be out, every Monday and every Friday. I've got a few days off getting to this. I'm going to the derby tonight, so obviously we're speaking on a Monday. Yeah. It's the under-21s derby in Kirkby. So I'll be going to that. Then I've got a couple of days off, and then I'll be back hopefully for Sean Dyche's press conference ahead of Aston Villa on Sunday, and going from there really. And obviously be down there on Sunday, going down to Villa Park for that. And I mean, I think it might be a difficult day. I think, to be honest, okay. but hopefully buoyed by a few players coming back from injury and maybe a little bit more work in the transfer market, and hopefully we can see the forward steps being made continue for the rest of this week. Absolutely. I'm looking forward to reading your match report from the derby tonight. I'm looking forward to listening, as always, to the Royal Blue podcast. But Joe, thanks for coming on Across the Park. Hey, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Guys, thanks for watching this episode of Across the Park podcast. If you are listening on the audio channels, thank you as always. What I will say is please open your phone, type in YouTube, type Across the Park podcast, and please like, share, and subscribe. Subscribing to us really, really helps. You notice we're in the amazing Pod Cafe studios here in Liverpool City Centre. We only have these deals because we can go to these companies with our reach and say, look at our subscribers, look what we can do for you, and how we can work together. So we really do appreciate anyone who's subscribed to the channel. If you haven't, please subscribe, like, and share this video. I've had a really bad hangover today, as you can tell. That's why I've given all the questions to Joe. I was at a Scouse Irish wedding yesterday, so I'm off for a curry to sit in a dark room. But as always, up the toffees.